Now let me welcome our next speaker, Petra MARKO. Again, technical urbanism will be the topic, but she also wants to focus on what is the value of public spaces. She will talk about placemaking, which also is a topic of her book. And again, she brings a number of specific real life examples. And I hope that it's these examples that will motivate you to implement real tangible change in your cities. So now, Petra, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. When I had initial chat with Petra about what I should speak about today, she asked me to sort of take us a little bit to the sort of big topic of what is actually public space and what is the role of public space. And so it was amazing to have Mike's sort of quick fire of all those examples and all those statistics. I always take snapshots of statistics and data because I think it's really important, particularly for the politicians. So I'm Petra MARKO, I'm a co-founder of MARKO and Placemakers, and when people ask me, non-architects ask me, what do we actually do? We design or strategize and plan everything in between the buildings, and this could be really small scale, squares or plazas or small bits of public space, up to the scale of master planning. And so coming back to sort of everything in between buildings, in the 18th century, it was the first time, and architects are very familiar with this image, the famous Nolli plan. Nolli came up with the idea how to actually read and map the city. And this is very, very much used by architects today, looking at the void and the solid in the city. And you can actually see all of the white space. This is all public space. So everything in between buildings, which normally when you imagine public space or when somebody says public space, usually we imagine the sort of nice public spaces like parks and plazas and pedestrian streets. But there's a lot more in between those buildings and also within the courtyards, etc. So this includes streets, this includes pavements, underpasses, overpasses, and on purpose I've selected some which are not as flattering, and we're very familiar with these. I forgot to mention I was born and grew up in Bratislava. I spent most of my professional career in London, but our practice is more and more engaged in work in Central Europe, also here in Prague and in Bratislava. So I'm going to try to sort of link up with the issues that we are dealing with here in terms of also our cultural and architectural heritage. And so about 80% of those in-between spaces in our cities are taken actually up by streets. And this is a famous diagram or series of photographs with which I'm sure many of you have seen. And it really makes us think about how do we take up this space? How do we use this street space? So this shows the same amount of people using cars versus public transport, bus versus bikes. And you can see that in the middle and the right side, there's actually a lot of scope for doing a lot more with the street than just using it to move from A to B. So why is the design of these in-between void spaces, literally in between the structures, important? This is quite a sort of extreme juxtaposition of two same type of development. So we're talking about housing, suburban housing. On the right-hand side, it's a new development called Byhusene on the outskirts of Copenhagen. And on the left-hand side is a typical suburban development on the outskirts of Bratislava in one of the satellites. And you can see, probably without me explaining it, why it's really important to think about how this space in between the buildings works. So on the left-hand side example, this is something that we're dealing with on the outskirts of Prague, on the outskirts of Bratislava, of all the sort of post-socialist countries and cities, to be honest, and this sprawl is happening. And you can see that there isn't even a pavement to walk on. So you can imagine if you have a toddler or a small child, you probably won't be even feeling safe to let them go and play on the street. You're actually dependent on your car to go about your daily needs. The example from Copenhagen shows that perhaps the shared streets, and I'm sure that you all will believe it and would have experienced it as well at some point, opens up the possibility for relationships to build between the neighbors, between children, being able to independently go and visit another kids down the lane, play on the street. And this idea of the relationship is important in public space and in placemaking, because we really form everybody's image and experience of the city is individual and it's different. And it's formed by our day-to-day interactions with people and the places that we circle around, that we use. So we sort of formed this kind of mental map of the city. And I have to stress that it's really different for everyone. So a city which could be great for somebody could be really oppressive and unwelcoming to somebody else. And this touches on the point of Mike's image earlier, where you know, you can have people dining and then actually there's all sorts of other things going on. So public space really is this social exchange space, and this is one of my favorite places on my mental map of London. It's the Columbia Road Flower Market. It happens every Sunday, not even for the whole day, it's just for half a day. It sort of finishes at 3 p.m., but it completely transforms the street, and it's filled with people and filled with flowers. Now, people don't come here to just buy flowers, because you could even do that in your corner shop. People come here to be with other people, and people come here to be with strangers. One of the beautiful things about cities and big cities, dense cities, is this amazing sensation that we actually want to be amongst other people that we don't know, and there's a dynamics to that which really attracts us, besides of the jobs, etc., etc. So this idea of the social exchange is important in the understanding of placemaking and how we build our cities and what kind of city we want. And you can see, again, a sort of extreme example. This is in North America, where in the course of 20th century, there's been this division of those social spaces and the space of the home and the space of the work. And the distances became bigger and bigger, and the need for moving around with a car was greater and greater, and this was driven by the type of infrastructure that was built for cars. And it was also not always helped by the modernism movement, which had some amazing ideas, really some good ideas to provide really good quality housing, sanitation, etc., to deal with really big problems at the time, where people were living in really cramped conditions. But as a result of this, actually, top-down planning, we in this region where we find ourselves, we have this legacy of the suburbs, of the housing blocks, which are very far apart, with spaces which initially were planned to be these amazing parks and squares. Most of those spaces have been, unfortunately, taken over by cars. A lot of the public spaces on the right-hand side, you can see, are actually unmaintained. They are not places you want to be in, and they are not welcoming. And on the other hand, there's also the legacy. So that previous example was from one of the biggest suburbs in Bratislava, but in Prague you've got similar suburbs, and then the modernist buildings which have some amazing architectural qualities, but which were usually part of sort of bigger, grander plan, which usually was not finished. So this department store and a hotel in the center of Bratislava has been a sort of this white elephant for over 30 years now. It's in private ownership, very central location in the city. A developer wasn't able to make a viable project go through planning so far. And you can see what is happening around it is that a lot of these structures have kind of been dropped into the city and have destroyed the original structure and character of the city blocks with a series of very undefined, again, public spaces which have been taken over by lots of types of illegal structures, advertising, and so on. So you can see all sorts of weird things happening, and this is a very typical image of this legacy of architecture that we have in this region. But now I don't want to just focus on the negatives, but there's also way of positive transformation. So this is the Slovak National Gallery from the 70s. There was a famous Slovak architect who had built this bridge extension of the gallery. In the 1990s, this was the most hated building by all residents in Bratislava. It was really a question of, can this even stay there? Architecturally, all architects were saying, this is amazing, this needs to be salvaged. It had taken 30 years, and on the right-hand side, you can see the successful reconstruction. But what really made this project take it to the 21st century, this sort of renovation of this legacy and the architecture heritage, is, in my opinion, the public space. So the courtyard of the Slovak National Gallery, and you can see on the left-hand side the bridge, and you come in. The courtyard and the public space and the way that it was activated has really transformed it even further. So originally, when the gallery was built in the 70s, it didn't have this active use in the courtyard. It wasn't like this. So I think the key really to unlock the potential and the value of this legacy of architecture is really to also very carefully work with activating the public space. And this is an example of a project that we worked on in Manchester, where sometimes, often you have the architecture which is given, and but there is something you can do about it. So Daniel Libeskind is quite a famous architect. Some of you would have heard about him. It's the Imperial War Museum North in Salford, south part of Manchester. And you can see that it doesn't have any, previously didn't have any relationship to the waterfront. The entrance to the building was actually from the back, from the parking lot. So through the scheme that we worked on of the promenade, we were able not just to create and extend the waterfront, but we were able to negotiate also and communicate with the museum and to introduce a new entrance from the waterside, so that this space in front of the museum can be also used for their purposes, for pop-up exhibitions, etc. So there's a lot we can do in terms of public space to transform surroundings of buildings and even buildings themselves without touching them. And another important point about this project was that actually this bridge is not our project. This is by Wilkinson Air, and you can see there's a seamless transition. It's really important to have the continuity in the city. So when you walk with the buggy or on the bike or walking, it's really important to have a continuity of surfaces, to have a continuity of the experience, so that you're not sort of constantly facing these barriers. So coordination and communication across different teams on projects is important. And on the right-hand side, I'm zooming into the really biggest scale of this strategy that we actually worked on, and the Trafford Wharf Promenade was the first part that was realized. So we started with a big strategy about sort of, post-industrial future, what is the future of the river that was very polluted, that the city was turning its back on, to be the place where people would meet and the place where the life would evolve. So we think of the public space as an extended living room. So this is an example of a market town, Kettering, a small historic town, where we've been tasked to transform their market square. And there's a level of flexibility. This is not tactical urbanism that Mike was talking about, because this is permanence, but there's a level of flexibility, and it's opening up for people to be able to sort of adapt and use it in the way that they want. So it's about creating the canvas where life can unfold. So for instance, the sandbox comes out only in the summer, and there's all sorts of things. My favorite image of this project is on the left-hand side, where you actually can't see the project. It's not the project, it's the people who make it, and we sort of prepare the ground for it. So it's very much also about this idea of mental ownership and stewardship, which was also mentioned by Mike. And Northowe Fields Park is a park that we did in West London next to the A40. I could be talking for an hour about it. It's made out of recycled construction waste. But the important aspect for today's talk and the discussions that we're having is developing this sense of relationship and sense of mental ownership to the space. There was a 2-year consultation process that engaged local residents in discussions. Part of those discussions also informed the fact that there were these fishing lakes integrated in the design idea of the project. So on the right-hand side, it's two brothers who have been part of the consultation, who are helping the local charity with maintaining the lakes. People take really pride in the park. It's won the Green Flag Award, which is an award for parks in the UK. This is not an award for architects or designers. This is really an award for the local community, for the people who really take pride in their local park. And we also come back, and in the middle you can see me in the background there chatting to this group of people. We come back to some of the projects to really see how they work and how people embrace them. So this is a multi-generational family who have been celebrating their great-grandmother's birthday in the park. So not everybody needs to be doing the work of taking care of it, but there's a sense of relationship that people develop to these places. And Jane Jacobs comes back, so there is no logic that can be superimposed on the city. People make it, and it is to them, not buildings. We must fit our plans. So a great advocate in the 60s, where the placemaking movement really emerged in New York City, for lively streets, for safeguarding neighborhoods which were meant to be bulldozed, where Jane Jacobs was saying, actually, there's a value and there's a character in this neighborhood that needs to be not just saved or preserved, but needs to be embraced, and this is what makes the city, so the idea of eyes on the street, to be able to be safe and have active frontages and life on the street. And in order to have that, you actually have to have a diversity of uses. And here is where the famous, now very famous, 15-minute city concept comes in by Carlos Moreno. And it's the idea that you can get about your daily needs within 15 minutes of walking or cycling, depending on how you look at it. There's been some rumors about, there's some hoaxes about 15-minute city locking people in one neighborhood. It's not true, but unfortunately, even the British government went on the bandwagon of this hoax and is now reversing or backtracking on some of low traffic neighborhoods and so on. So I wanted to take us also beyond the 15 minutes to this idea of the multi-timed city. So this is part of the Urban Challenge project, which Esther Kurland at Urban Design London is leading, and it's looking at really from 1 minute to 60 minutes. So it's looking at what do you need on the doorstep, on the curb. Let's say for very elderly people with reduced mobility or very small children, toddlers, it's not the 15 minutes, it's actually the 5 minutes, it's the 1 minute, it's the doorstep. For an elderly person who is not mobile, it's about their front garden, it's about the courtyard of their residential block. And so it is for very small children. So it's the idea, and then you can also, on a weekend, go to the Natural History Museum, or you go to the gallery, which you might take the underground or the bus, etc. So there's all these options that the city needs to cater for and think about in terms of public spaces and how we treat everything from the little detail of the doorstep to the big details of how do our big sort of major public spaces look like. And some of this thinking, or very much a lot of this thinking, has been part of the project that we're working on here in Prague, Florence, which is the area of the existing bus station, and many of you local here will be familiar with this area. It is a very fragmented area, but it is very near the historic center, and it's sort of defined by barriers at the moment. So you've got the elevated motorway, you've got two railway lines with viaducts, you've got many barriers, and so the big challenge, because this is a 24-hectare site, the big challenge here was, how do we work with some of these barriers, because we can't make it perfect, but let's make it good, because we can't undo everything at once. So we have to work with also what is there. And so the concept is really to create, in order to have the walkable city and the 15-minute city, we really need people to live in the city. So this area is going to be mixed use, but with large proportion of housing as well. It's going to build on the idea of the compact high-density blocks, which we are familiar with from the center of Prague. The advantage of these blocks is that you have these active frontages, traditional streets, street profiles, and it's all about having a compact city of short distances. And we heard at the beginning of today in the introduction that this is really the direction, and it does take a long time. One of the big moves in this master plan is actually to partially submerge the bus station underground in order for you to be able to have that pedestrian street, that gateway into the city. At the moment, the bus station is a barrier in itself, so it's taking up a huge space that you can't really walk around even. So this is one of the key moves. It also links up with the metro station on the right-hand side across the street, as you can see. And there's also, besides the infrastructure barriers, there's also topographical changes. So so you can see from the south part down towards the city center, there's a lot of changes. So the approach to public spaces here is to create a continuous network of public spaces and small plazas and street corners and terraces. So it's not about some, really big squares or huge parks, but it's about a network and this linear movement and this continuity that I was talking about. And it is about embracing and transforming these barriers. So if you think about, let's say, the railway viaducts, these could be spaces for markets, for retail, the spaces underneath the elevated motorway could be urban play, cultural spaces, and so on. This project is going to take some years to come off the ground, and hopefully there will be also some tactical steps in between. And Mike might want to get involved in there. That would be great. But you can see from these examples that transforming public space is really, or even the city, is really a complex equation, and it requires the consensus of many different parties, and it's about establishing common values and goals. So now in the second part, I'm going to quick fire through some of these topics, which I think are relevant and important in terms of democratizing and activating public spaces, and why is it important. So who owns public space, child-friendly and inclusive city, the role of tactical urbanism, just very briefly, climate adaptation, and vision and political leadership. So public spaces, as we think of them, many are not actually in public ownership. And this is an increasing trend where cities simply don't have the finance to maintain and upkeep public spaces. And this is a trend which, again, comes from North America and the business improvement district model and so on. When there's a public space which is in private ownership, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad public space. It's about establishing the rules in this space and safeguarding the public interest. So you have example of a public space in Prague here on Naplavka on the left. In the middle, it's at King's Cross. This is a private development with 40% of the area is public space. A huge project which had been built over 20 years. And then you've got Eurovia waterfront in Bratislava, which is privately managed public space. So there are different forms of public spaces. And it's just important to be aware of this, aware of the ownership, and be aware of, what do we actually need to protect in public space. If you're interested in this, I recommend the book Ground Control by Anna Minton, a British journalist who has covered this extensively. But some public spaces, obviously, which are in private ownership, you can't have demonstrations, etc. The Paternoster Square in London during the Occupy movement protests is a typical example where people had been removed and then they moved outside of St. Paul's Cathedral. But then there's also some really odd and bizarre rules. There's an example from the Zuccotti Park where you're told that you can't sort of lie on the grass, and all sorts of weird rules which are primarily aimed at removing homeless people from this space. So in London, they've been thinking about, the City Hall has been thinking about this extensively. So London has a public London Charter, This charter is about safeguarding the principles owners and managers of public spaces need to follow to ensure that any new public space in London is safe, accessible, attractive, and inclusive. And those are the 8 principles. So the public needs to be welcome. There's a sense of openness. It's unrestricted in terms of use. This doesn't mean that you can do bad things. I mean, even in public space, you're supposed to be behaving as a human being. So obviously, if there's criminal behavior, this is not what unrestricted use means. Community focus, free of charge, so the ability to be there without having to buy something. This really needs to be safeguarded in public space. Then there's all sorts of things about privacy and data which are linked to surveillance, etc., transparency, and good stewardship, which again is about who maintains this space. And London goes even further, broadening the definition of public space, because many of London's public spaces are internal, semi-internal, or elevated. And they, again, might be in private ownership, but they are presenting themselves as public space. They are inviting people to come there. So there is additional guidance, design guide on expanding London's public realm, and this is also interesting. So another topic is children, and particularly with walkability and going to school, and we'll hear more about that later also from other speakers. But I'd like to point out this diagram in the middle, which is from the report and guidance Making London Child-Friendly. And it's about number of places to go and things to do. So if you have a lot of things to do, and then the ability to move around independently is the vertical. So if you have a lot of things to do and you can get there independently as a child or a teenager or a kid, then that is a child-friendly environment. But if you, on the other hand, if you can go there independently but there's nothing to do, then that's the wasteland. If you can't go there by yourself and there's nothing to do, it's a cell. And then the glass house is where you're typically ferried by parents to different activities, from school to activity and home, etc., and to a play date. And this is a practice which is, I think, really very widely practiced in our context in Central Europe here, and this is what walkable cities are trying to sort of change and transform, to give children that freedom and independence, because independent mobility of children is a big indicator of livable cities. And I really love this very, very simple scheme on Station Road in Harrow in London, where you can see that it's not just about saying like you have to cycle or walk because it's better for the planet. It actually can be fun. And it can be, and it can include everyone. And you can see this is cycling, walking, and public transport, and a street frontage. And I just love how this scheme sort of captures that moment. And then scaling up these initiatives, super important and powerful, and that brings the value. So school streets from 5 pilots to 40 in 2 years in London. It started in London Borough of Hackney, which has very strong political leadership on the topic and has 9% modal share of cycling, as opposed to 3% cycling in the rest of London. But also, again, as mentioned, pandemic, for instance, in London, 100 kilometers of segregated cycle paths were built, which was twice as speed as they were being built before the pandemic. So when there's a crisis, there is also an opportunity. The point here with Grezzo Oase Vienna is this is a city-led program which gives residents financial and organizational support to create parklets or spaces for children on their street. And the condition is that the person or a group of people who are applying through the scheme needs to live directly adjacent to where they are planning to do the project. This wants to ensure that there's this sense of stewardship, that they will also take care of it and take pride in it. And what's amazing to see is how people have transformed, can see the power of transforming their street very quickly. And as part of the scheme, they don't have to worry about taking up parking spaces. So this is an advantage at the moment in other cities. When you want to take over parking space, actually your parklet will be towed away because legally you're not allowed to do that. And if, as a resident, as somebody who's not from the built environment industry, you wouldn't even know where to start to the process to apply for doing this. So this scheme has actually supported 500 projects over 4 years. So it's not just a couple of projects here and there, it's really powerful. And what's powerful about it, that it's activating citizens, it's bringing communities together, and it's been even fast-tracked during the pandemic when it became even more important. So this idea of belonging, and particularly for young people in the city, and I'm very interested also in the topic, in the gender aspects of it. So teenage girls, for instance, spend a lot less time outdoors in public space. So the initiative by Pigalle and Nike, who are two sports brands, is creating these pop-up basketball courts around the world. It started in Paris, but this one in Beijing is particularly focused on female athletes. And you can see that the way that the space is designed is that there's a lot of transparency, there's good lighting, but not too much lighting. You know, it's all about these details of the design when it comes to it. In London, oftentimes when you come to a basketball court, it has a high brick wall and it only has one entrance. So this is a space which is intimidating and not really doesn't feel safe maybe for teenage girls to come in but especially when there's a bunch of guys. And so the idea of safety of women in public space and walking on streets is very important. And the pražské židle and stolky, so the Prague chairs and tables, have been mentioned already. This is a quick way of appropriating the street and giving that ownership over to people. And on the left-hand side is an example from Barcelona, which also looks at the gender issue on school playgrounds, where they are mostly dominated by a football pitch, and looking at ways how you can have multi-play area in the playground where actually different activities can also take place. It's not saying there shouldn't be football. It's actually saying, at different times there could be different activities going on, and perhaps more girls also need to be could take part in that. So a lot of the recent projects that I mentioned are covered in the book Meanwhile City, which I've put together with a team of researchers and designers at Milk, a visual design studio who are based in Bratislava, who approached me last year for this collaboration. And behind this wall in the bookshop, there's some copies if you're interested on the topic. And this is, yes, tactical urbanism, but it also covers meanwhile use of abandoned buildings. It also covers sort of cultural pop-ups. So it covers a sort of broader range. It's not just about the streets, cycling and walking, but a broader range of topics, including young people, etc., and with some great interviews with experts. And also our aim, similar to Mike's activities and sort of the whole point of this interim meanwhile use, is that actually the meanwhile transformation should lead to the long-term change and the long-term value, should support that long-term value. So it's not just something that comes and goes. And a quick example of that long-term value created is, I think, great example from Barcelona, where it's again a city-led program, Barcelona Superblocks, where they are closing off within that rigid street grid some of the streets, and over time, I mean, it's good for business, as we heard, more footfall, more people spend money in the shops, better air quality, traffic adjusts quite smoothly around. But in the long term, really important key point with where we are with the climate emergency today is the climate adaptation and a long-term system change. So it's about connecting the green grid of the city, which I think is a really powerful goal of this transformation. In order to do these transformations, political leadership is critical. Bottom-up initiatives are great, but if they're not met by political leadership who understands and has and shares that vision, then it's really difficult to make change and keep up doing the change over long term. The case of, Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, has taken clean air as one of his key agendas. there were a number of reasons why, a number of bottom-up initiatives, Mums for Lungs, etc. But a really interesting case to mention is the very sad, tragic case of the death of Ella Kisi Deborah, who died in 2012. I'm sorry, I always get so emotional when I talk about this, but basically her mom has been campaigning for about 8 years. And in 2020, the coroner ruling concluded that air pollution was a major contributing factor to her death. Ella lived in an area with high air pollution, walking to school on a street which was very, very polluted. There was no information or communication or even awareness at the time about the effects of air pollution. It has to be said that also air pollution affects lower income population disproportionately. So poorer areas of London have worse air pollution than wealthy areas, which is really something important to look at in terms of equitable city. And this case has really brought and opened the discussion about the need for local authorities to provide the minimum, so to be above the legal limit of air pollution, because you can't have toxic air and can't expose your sort of citizens to toxic air. So this was an important case, which now is escalating to a so-called Ella's law. So there's a legislation which is being pushed for to actually help with this case. And also importance of data again. So 99% of central London is above EU limits of emissions. I've got two more slides, so I'm going to wrap up in 2-3 minutes. So in 2016, and the introduction of ultra-low emission zone, together with a series of other bottom-up and policy changes, has helped and has had a huge impact on air quality in London. So the ultra-low emission zone is that you can't come with certain types of vehicles into central London. The aim is not to collect money, but the aim is to actually prevent those vehicles to come to central London, for people to choose different modes of transport. And on a national level, there's the gear change report. I mentioned the school streets and low traffic neighborhoods. And bringing it back home, or sort of almost home, near in the neighboring Bratislava in Slovakia, political leadership has been key in transformation of the city's public spaces. Back in 2018, Matúš Valo had campaigned to become mayor. He brought 70 experts together to publish this book, Plan Bratislava. So this was a joint vision which was informed by 70 experts from different fields, not just architecture, transport, but culture, education, etc. He's now running in his second term. Change is visible on the ground. Freedom Square has been just completed recently. I mentioned also the Slovak National Gallery. And sometimes it's also about those unpopular decisions and making sure to enforce the law on those. So up until recently, parking on curbs in all of Slovakia was legal, so cars could park on any pavement anywhere, which is sort of ridiculous because this is the pedestrian space. So now this is legal. A parking policy was introduced by Valo during his first term, and it was very unpopular with many motorists, of course. He won the second term even with higher popularity. So it's possible to even do those politically unpopular decisions and drive that long-term change, and it is possible to be part of it individually, each of us. So this is me cycling in London, this is me in Bratislava, and taking my son's friends on public transport. I was shocked that some of his schoolmates hadn't actually been on the tram yet. So as much as I can expose people to this amazing experience, I do it, and every one of us can do it on a daily basis, making those decisions. I probably don't need to, if we're running out of time, I don't need to go through this summary, but public space belongs to all people, mental ownership. It's about growing relationship between people and place. It's about understanding that public space has transformational value. It needs to be safe, connected, and inclusive. It is a consensus, and it's not always perfect, but it's about coming together and agreeing on some shared values amongst different interests. political leadership, good communication. What kind of city do we want? We should be asking ourselves this question when we are creating, all of us who are taking part in this process. Thank you.